What's going on, everyone? It's Tay, aka Slay, and we're back on that Chris Evans train today. See what I did there? It seemed appropriate. We are talking about a movie that holds, in my humble opinion, one of Chris's best performances. Today, I am giving you my thoughts on Snowpiercer. One of the reasons I'm doing this series is because I really want you all to watch these movies for yourself and come to your own conclusions, and also to share the joy of my man's Chris Evans. So, Snowpiercer was released in 2014. The growth between Snowpiercer and the last movie I watched, Cellular, it's like planting an acorn and then coming back and seeing the tree. It's phenomenal just how in depth Chris is and how in character he is, as opposed to Cellular. Well, like I said in that review, where it's like any generic hot white actor could have played that role. With this one, I really think this role called upon Chris's talents, and this is one of those I can't see anybody else playing Curtis Everett. So let's dive in. The first scene, and it's damn near the first scene in the movie that really, really shook me because of the brutality. It's feeding time. And you have very militarized security guards coming in, and one comes in and asks, does anybody here play the violin? And this very soft-spoken old man comes up with his wife and says, my wife and I played in the symphony orchestra. My wife was actually first chair. And the guard says, okay, you leave all your belongings, come with us. And he says, not both. He's like, no, we just need one of you. And the old man says, well, then we're not going. Then they start to walk away, and you hear someone call the old woman's name. And the next thing you see is the butt of a rifle being brought down over her face, like just cracking her across the nose. And I'm like, for what? Why? I guess so they could pry the husband off of her. And he's yelling back to her as they're leading him away, saying, don't worry, Doris, I'll come back for you. The very next shot is her downtrodden with the scar caused by the rifle bleeding, and she's very timidly eating her protein block. This really illustrates the military state and the conditions that the tail passengers must endure on a daily basis. Like, you don't really see the passengers in the front of the train, which is the point, obviously, because the story focuses on the tail passengers making their way to the front so that they can have better lives. John Hurt, he is amazing in everything he does, and he is incredible in this film as well. He plays, father and grandfather figures very, very well. John Hurt's character is named Gilliam. Chris's character is named Curtis. And Gilliam is Curtis's mentor. They are conspiring together to stage this revolution. There's a message being sent in the protein block, and Curtis and Gilliam are discussing it. Edgar bursts in. Edgar, played by Jamie Bell, who's also a delight, starts questioning, like, well, if we need to do this, why can't we do this? And Curtis says, you need to leave. There's one thing about this movie is everything comes full circle. Nothing is to be missed. Like, I'm actually really glad that I watched this movie twice. I didn't want to because it was so heavy and it affected me so much. I was like, I don't know if my heart can take a second viewing, especially not the day right after the first viewing. But this film really does require a couple of watches so that you get everything, because everything does come full circle. There's no detail that is meaningless. And I think that speaks to the strength of writer-director Bong Joon-ho. Side note, I really want to see Parasite now because that movie won the Oscar and this is the same director. So I feel like I'm ready to watch Parasite having seen Snowpiercer. Anyway, Gilliam says to Curtis, Edgar thinks the world of you. He just wants to help. Curtis is what I would consider a reluctant hero. Everybody keeps pushing him to be the leader, and he's like, I'm not a leader, I'm not that man, even though that's the role that he's assumed. And this is the first instance of that, where Curtis looks at Gilliam and he says, he shouldn't worship me the way that he does. I'm not who he thinks I am. And it makes sense. Like I said, as the movie goes along, you see everybody saying, eventually you're going to have to take the lead because Gilliam's not going to live forever. And that scene is so poignant because it sets up Curtis's mindset. He's like, I'm doing this for the will of others. I might be the strongest one doing this, but I'm doing this under the guidance of Gilliam. Like the second scene that really touched me, Curtis says, "Edgar, how far back do you remember?" And he says, "I don't know. Why?" "Like what?" He says, "Your mother, do you remember her?" As the story goes, you learn that there are children that were exclusively born on the train. Children who never lived on Earth, don't remember before the new ice age. They were born and raised on the train. Curtis actually says later that he barely remembers life before the train because he chose to block it out. It's also really poignant with the very next scene where you see children being taken away from their mothers. The guards come back and they say, "Health inspection, bring all the children forward." And this woman in yellow, I think her name is Claude, something like that, she measures the children and she starts leading them away. There's a man named Andrew who tries to hide his son, but he ends up being taken. And Tanya, played by the marvelous Octavia Spencer, she hides her son under her dress. She's almost caught, but Claude starts walking away and she screams at her son to run. The guards grab Timmy and beat the shit out of Tanya. If you've seen The Color Purple, like after Sophia has her tussle with the mayor, that's what Octavia Spencer looks like after this beating for the rest of the movie. And you're just like, why? Like, they don't know what is going to happen to their children. And that's that mama bear instinct. Like, I'm going to protect my cub. I'm going to do what I need to do to protect my cub. So both Tanya and Andrew lose their children. Andrew is so angry that he takes off his shoe and he throws it at Claude and it hits her in the face. And as punishment, this scene. As punishment, his arm is clamped. There's a metal ring that's put around his arm and it's put outside of a portal, exposed to the outside world, and frozen for 7 minutes. Frozen solid. It's if you took your hand and put it in liquid nitrogen. That's what they're doing to punish him for hurting one of the elite. During the 7 minutes, because that's what they say, they're like, at this altitude we only need 7 minutes. That's how long it'll take his arm to completely freeze. Minister Mason comes to give a speech. Minister Mason is played by the incomparable Tilda Swinton. I have not seen a movie that Tilda Swinton has been bad in at all. Quick tangent. Favorite role of hers is Gabriel in Constantine. She walks that line of morally ambiguous so well. She gives this speech while Andrew's arm is being frozen about order. Everybody from the front and in the elite are about balance and order, everybody having their set station. It sounds like a caste system. It's like you're born into this area and that's where you'll stay. If you're a child of a tail end passenger, you will stay in the tail until you die. Like that's your lot in life. She uses a visual. She uses the shoe that Andrew threw at Claude and she places it on his head. And she says, "A shoe does not belong on the head. It belongs on the foot. A hat belongs on the head. I am a hat. You are a shoe. Be a shoe. Just accept where you are." And it's obvious because we've already seen the defiance in Curtis's eyes. It's like, that's not what he's about to do. No, ma'am. And there's this moment where you see Minister Mason go, "We all have our preordained position." Keep that in mind, that arm movement. Just keep that in mind. So then, after her speech, Andrew is pulled away from the portal, the window, and his arm is broken off. Thankfully, a lot of the gore, the more brutal violence is done off screen. Like, you do see some things, you do see some blood flying, you do see punches and weapons being used and things like that. But the more up close and personal violence is suggested. And I think that was a great call on the part of the director and the cinematographer and everybody else involved, because I think if you're trying to get forth this kind of message, If it's just an onslaught of gore, people are going to be turned off. So the next scene that really shook me was the revolt, where they finally say, enough, we're going to do this, now is the time. Curtis walks right up to a guard, takes his gun, and puts it to his head, and the guard, it forces the guard to pull the trigger, and you hear a click. Then you hear an echo, Edgar's voice ring out saying, they don't have any bullets. All hell breaks loose. Again, these fight scenes are choreographed so geniusly because it's not like those fight scenes where you can tell they were rehearsed and it's like, okay, I'm going to hit you now, you're going to fall over here. This looks like a street brawl. The tail passengers fight their way to the prison station because there's this anonymous person who's been sending notes back to the tail through the protein packs. And he tells him about, I'm just going to call him Nam for the rest of this. He is a security specialist, and he is the one that designed the gates on the train, and he knows how to open and close them. So they're like, if we get him, he can get us to the front. So they break into the prison car, and they free him and his daughter, 17-year-old Yona. She is a train baby. She's never been on Earth. And she also appears to be clairvoyant because she is able to see what's going on behind the gates before the gates open. There's a drug that is central to the characters of Nam and Yona called chronal. It is a hallucinogen that several passengers use, obviously. It's also very, very flammable. So they negotiate Nam's help. He's like, hey, we'll help you get chronal. We'll give you 10 uncut, just pure, straight from the source chronal if you help us open these gates. Other scene that really shook me was when we find out what the protein blocks are made of. They're made of insects, what look like roaches and crickets. The face that Chris's character makes, where he just covers his mouth and is horrified and looks like he's going to vomit, that's how I felt the first time I saw it. The insects they don't look live, they look CGI'd, which is fine, but just the thought that, for some people in some cultures, eating insects is a delicacy, but for me, that's gross. And to know that that's how low the people in the front, the people with power, think of the people in the tail. They're not good enough to be served real food. We're gonna feed them bugs. That shit is gross. How can you be so cold and just so hard? We can't give them real food. We're going to serve them the lowest creatures that are available upon this train. We're just going to hoard the insects. That's how they'll live. So after they make their way through that car, there's another pill in a protein block that Curtis finds, and it says water. He takes it to Gilliam, and Gilliam says, the next car is the water supply car. And they surmise that if they get control of the water, they can control the negotiations for better life for the tail passengers. So as they go to open the gate to get to the water supply station, the door pulls back slowly, and all you see, this is the stuff of my nightmares, all you see are these men in black masks that that cover everything but their mouths, and they're holding axes. At one point there's this huge ass fish that's being passed around so the guys can put their axe in it and just get the axes wet with blood, and it's so terrifying. And it's meant to be, but especially in this world where we see this rise, this return of unafraid, unabashed white supremacy, people going to grocery stores in hoods, I'm just like, this right here is some scary shit. You see the build up and everybody starts shaking, and then Curtis flinches and it's game on, and it's like axes are swinging and people are being killed left and right. It's visceral. And then you hear somebody over the intercom saying, "Now passing Yekaterina Bridge." And these dudes with these masks and axes start counting down. They're like 8, 7, 6. And then they shout Happy New Year. In the middle of this melee, you're going to be like, let's celebrate the new year? What? The absurdity. They really stopped this fight to celebrate. Whew. It's beyond absurd to me. It makes sense later, given the indoctrination of the people in the front. But just the fact that they would stop this fight to stop these tail end passengers to say Happy New Year. It's like, wait, what is happening? You see Nam pull his daughter up in the melee to look outside the window, and you see him looking down, and there's a plane crash, the remains of a plane, and you just see him staring at it. Just like you're wondering why people are shouting and celebrating Happy New Year, you're wondering why he's taking the time to look out this window while there's a melee happening. It's just like, people have lost their minds. That's sanity, we don't know her. So I guess in this situation, you really wouldn't. The fight is stopped by the arrival of Minister Mason, and she's berating the tail end passenger. She's like, you ingrates, you have sucked greedily from the tit of Mr. Wilford, and now you will be punished for your ungratefulness. And she says, 74% of you will die. Then the lights are turned off. This is one of the most brilliantly shot scenes in the film. Just the visionary that is Bong Joon-ho. The scene is shot from the point of view of one of the guys in the black masks, night vision goggles. And so you see, again, another melee taking place. I was so blown away by that visual. The first time I watched this movie, I was like, wow. Like, I know this is probably not the first, like, night vision scene that's been on screen, but the choice to do that after the first melee scene was just like, chef's kiss. In the midst of all of this, when you realize that there is no hope for the tail end passengers because they are at the disadvantages, you hear Curtis scream, "We need the fire, bring the fire." Now, earlier, there was a little boy, when they were breaking Nam out of the prison, who took Nam's matches. And you see him, in slow motion, light the match and light a torch. This sequence looks like they recreated the Olympic relay, where you have one person from one country carrying the torch, and then the torch is passed on to another person. The Olympics are like a symbol of hope. And that's what that scene does. Just, you see the rallying together of the tail end passengers, like, here, I'll take the torch this far, now I'm going to take it farther. And then you see, I guess, the tail end's best fighter take the torch and leap over the guys with the night vision goggles and just start kicking ass. And you're just like, yeah, I cheered. I think I woke up my roommates, but I was so happy. I was like, this is amazing. You know, it's like, what a brilliant way to fight back, because there's no way they could have anticipated that they would have fire to illuminate the car so that they could have a chance and fight back. Brilliant, I tell you. Brilliant, I say. While the tail end passengers have the upper hand, Minister Mason is injured. I don't know the names of these characters. They're two really menacing characters. It's implied that they're lovers. But this one guy who's a member of the elite is holding Edgar hostage. And Curtis has to make a choice. He can either go grab Minister Mason, or he can save Edgar. And you see him make the choice. You see him close his eyes and clench his teeth and turn away, because Edgar's over here and Minister Mason is over here, and he goes, ah, and he charges towards Mason, and the guy holding Edgar kills him. It's at that point where you're like, you know, Curtis is like, but all for the good of the mission. Because he knows that by having Mason, he can use her as a bargaining chip. And, sacrifices have to be made. Sad that it's, basically his right hand. But it's, I mean, that death was hard to watch. Not because it's gory or anything, but knowing that was basically Sophie's choice. Like, to be in that position. And I think that's one of the reasons that Curtis is so reluctant to be a leader. It's because he knows that he's going to have to make choices like that, and it breaks his heart. But he grabs Mason. Mason reveals that Mr. Wilford knows who Curtis is, and they've been watching him. And she has the audacity, while being chained to this boiler, having been threatened with axes by angry people, she has the audacity to taunt Curtis by saying, "Such a shame that you couldn't save your second in command." What was his name? Edgar? Now, I shouldn't love this scene as much as I do. Me loving this scene makes me question myself. Like, I don't understand why. Okay, let me just explain to you. After Minister Mason taunts Curtis, you hear what turns out to be a machete being unsheathed, and he rushes towards Mason and puts the machete to her neck and says, "Shut the fuck up." And she winces and she's like, Curtis, I can help you." And he says, "You can fucking die is what you can do." Both times I watched this movie, I rewound that scene at least 3 times. I shouldn't feel tingles when I see that. I'm sick. Like, I don't, I talked to a friend about it. I might need to be analyzed, that's all I'm saying. But it's one of my favorite scenes in the movie. Has to be if I rewound it 3 times. Anyway, please God, let Chris never ask me about that. Having a machete to her throat leads Mason to negotiate. She says, "Listen, I can get you safe passage to the front if you promise to kill Wilford." And he's like, "Why should we believe you? Why would you help us?" She's like, "Because I want to live." And in a show of vulnerability, she takes out her dentures. And that's so symbolic. It really shows that her bark is much worse than her bite. And she takes out her dentures to show that she's not a threat. It's shocking to everybody. It's shocking to the audience. It's shocking to the passengers. Like, she ain't got no teeth. We have another scene between Curtis and Gilliam. And Gilliam's like, "Are you determined to keep going forward?" And he says, "Yes." Gilliam echoes Edgar's words. Actually, no, he doesn't echo Edgar's words. He expands on them. He says, "You're already our leader." One thing I forgot to mention, John Hurt's character is missing limbs. And Curtis says, "How am I to lead when I've got 2 good arms?" Gilliam says, "Well, you'll be a much better leader because you have both arms. There's not a lot you can do with 1 arm, especially holding a woman. It's much better to hold a woman with 2 arms than 1. Wouldn't you agree?" You see Gilliam roll back Curtis's sleeve and you see a scar, and he whispers, "It's almost faded away." And Curtis snatches back his arm. And you're like, is he embarrassed of a scar? What's going on? The next day, after everyone's gotten some rest, they progress to the front. There's a person on this train who is very, very skilled at drawing. He drew pictures of the taken children, and he drew pictures of the goings-on on the train. I want to say he's kind of a pictorial historian, especially like in the scene where we find out what the protein blocks are made of. Curtis tells him specifically, "You cannot draw this." So when they progress, when they're getting ready to go to the gate, go through the next gate, this pictorial historian is drawing the people who are going forward. It's Tanya, it's Andrew, obviously Minister Mason, Curtis, and Gray, who is the best fighter in the bag. Gilliam actually says, "You have to go with Curtis now." So he goes in, and the guy's drawing him. In a bit of karmic retribution, so to speak, Andrew takes his shoe and places it on Minister Mason's head. It's like, if you made a fool of me, I'm going to make a fool of you. Shoes on the other foot, as it were. I shouldn't be laughing at my own joke. Anyway, they move through the train and they're seeing things that they've probably never seen while being on the train. They see an orchard being tended to. You know, now I'm walking through and you see Yona pick up dirt and she's like, what is this? And Nam says, that's what's under the snow. It's earth. She throws the dirt away and you see this huge aquarium. And you have to remember, a lot of these people either have never seen or don't remember what aquatic life looks like. And Minister Mason just goes, anybody want any sushi? Anybody want any sushi? And the wonderful Tanya, again played by Octavia Spencer, was like, sure, plate that shit up. Just all nonchalant, like, yeah, just plate that shit up, let's go. And as they're being served, Minister Mason says, you've decided to do this on a very special day. You know, you guys are very lucky. We only serve sushi twice a year. We only serve it in January and July. And Tanya's like, why? Are there not enough fish? And she says, no. It's because this is a closed ecosystem. So everything has to be in balance. There have to be only a certain number of people, a certain number of organisms, this, that, and the third. Like, everything has to be in perfect balance and perfect harmony in order for life on the train to continue. And you see Minister Mason getting ready to eat her piece of sushi, and Curtis yanks it away from her. And he says, no, you eat this, and it's a protein block. He's like, you know what this is made of? Eat up. He's just like, well, shit. And it makes sense, like, who wouldn't do the same thing? Like, this is what you've put us through for years. It's time for you to get a taste of your own medicine. You're sitting out here on your high horse. Like, it's time you're brought down a peg. They get to the school car. This scene disturbed me in so many ways. Because you're literally watching the indoctrination of the children in the front of the train. The children of the rich and powerful, the elite. You're seeing how they are being trained to think. One snotty ass blonde haired girl was like, I heard people in the tail of the train are lazy and they lay around in their own shit all day. Like, this is literally how racism and bigotry continues to persist in our world, because that mentality, those mindsets are passed down from adults to their children. It's so sickening, because it's like these children are taught to completely look down upon the less fortunate. Oh, it's appalling. And it's meant to be. It's obviously meant to be, but it's just like, oh. It's so, I'm getting nauseous just thinking about it. Oof. And they teach the lessons about, you know, the people who have tried to take over before, people who have tried to leave the train. They're taught these sayings like, if we leave the train, we all freeze and die. If the engine stops, we all die. And there are hand gestures. It looks like Nazi Germany. And you see the reverence of Wilford. How he is treated as a deity. They're singing songs of praise to a mortal man. Like church hymns in his honor. Again, I can't say it enough. It's sickening. It's supposed to be. But it's like, who? What? Why? I was disturbed, uneasy, terrified, unnerved. There aren't enough words to describe how much that scene sickened me. And what makes it worse is that towards the end of that scene, you have a cart being wielded in, a cart full of eggs. And the teacher's like, it's the New Year's eggs. Mr. Wilford has blessed us. Touch them, they're still warm. They're eggs. Now, that, may be a gesture beyond the thinking of the tail passenger since they're eating insects. It's a ruse because under the eggs are guns. And the teacher pulls out this gun and starts leveling the room. Now, this is disturbing because this was shot post Sandy Hook. So the fact that this is happening in a school car is very unnerving. But the teacher is pregnant. You have a teacher murdering folk while with child. What? That juxtaposition of life and death is just... Ooh, hold on to your panties. She is cold while doing it. She's just like, do. Oh, did I miss one? Boop. Cold, unfeeling, just robotic even. And I'm like, because these are the dregs of the earth. Thankfully, that teacher gets a knife to the throat and the rampage stops. But then on the screen, we're showing the movies to the children. You see Gilliam being executed. The first time you see Curtis shook, watching the loss of his mentor, his father figure. He's standing there in shock. Tanya starts calling his name. She's like, Curtis, Curtis! And he turns around and she slaps him. And she says, you have to lead us. Curtis grabs the gun that the teacher had in her hand, and you hear Mason pleading and begging and sniveling and groveling. Curtis puts a bullet in her head. And you see blood splatter onto his face. And he's stoic. He turns and says very simply, we go forward. There is another firefight that erupts. Within all of that, Nam is crouched down, and you see a single snowflake float past his face. Now, while we were in the school, there is a revolt that is being taught to the children called the Revolt of the Seven. 7 people decided to leave the train because they believed that they could survive outside. Nam tells Yona to look too, and he tells her that the person in the front, the first person of the 7, was a woman, a member of the cleaning staff, and she was Inuit, and she taught him about the snow and the ice. So that scene, singing with the single snowflake, and it's so beautiful. It's just one snowflake floating past his face. This movie is so, even with all of the heaviness, even with all of the hard images, it's still one of the most beautiful movies to look at that I've ever watched. It's little moments like that. Like, there's a scene that I forgot to mention, like the very first, during the revolt, where everything is happening and all of a sudden the action slows and you see Curtis moving very slowly, very methodically with the axe, and you hear piano music. You hear piano and you hear the cuts and the axe going into flesh, and you see Curtis's face. But there's this music. It's not intense action music. It's piano. Again, the juxtaposition, I love that word, is magnificent. There's this whole scene that takes place in a sauna. The most tragic thing about this scene is that this is the scene where Tanya dies. And it breaks your heart because you want so badly for this mother to be reunited with her son. Like, she begged Curtis to let her go with him. She was like, I'm stronger than most of these men anyway. I want my son. I'm going to fight for my son. To have her ever get to see him again. Like, there are many moments in this movie that are simply heartbreaking. But she is shot. And right before she dies, Curtis promises her that he will find her son. And she says, I know. Thank you. And then she passes. And it's only at this point Curtis, Nam, and Yona. They're in this like elaborate, what looks like club car. It looks like a car run by ravers. You know what it looks like? It honestly looks like the club scene from Birds of Prey. People are in next to nothing. If they're not, in bright colors, they're wearing fur, and Yona and Naim are walking through tables, grabbing up all the chronal they can. At the end of that car is the final gate. So you see Curtis standing in front of this gate, and he's like banging on it. He's like, open the gate, open the gate, open the gate. And Naim's like, no. And they turn on each other and start throwing bows. Like, Curtis catches those Naim hands. This scene right here, if I didn't already love Chris Evans as an actor, this scene would have made me fall in love with him immediately, because Chris put his entire foot in this scene, okay? He acted his ass off. This is the first time you see that stoic stature break down. Curtis starts telling Nam that when they first boarded the train, the tail passengers, Wilford's soldiers came and took everything and left the 1,000 people that were in the tail of the train without food and water. 1 month after they boarded the train, in those conditions, they turned to cannibalism. Curtis says, the thing I hate the most about myself is that I know what people taste like. I know babies taste best. That is the line that Stephanie terrorized me with. My friend Stephanie, Steph I Will on Twitter, was live tweeting Snowpiercer. And she said, no, I did not just hear Captain America say that he knows babies taste best. I'm like, what are you talking about? And then the next day, she retweeted some article about global warming, and she was like, y'all better fix this, because I'm not about to be on some train that's perpetually going around the earth trying to stop Captain America from eating a baby because they taste best. And I tweeted her, I'm like, you're just going to keep terrorizing me with that line, aren't you? That made me terrified to watch this movie, because I was afraid that I was going to see Chris Evans with a baby's belly at his lips and just diving in. I was so terrified. I was like, I don't want to see it. But glad I finally watched this movie. I'm mad I didn't watch it sooner. But that's this scene right here. He's weeping. He's like, I hate that I let myself get to that point to where I'm eating other people. The line he says specifically is, after a month we ate the weak. So basically, those not strong enough to fight back were lunch. He says there were men who fell upon this woman who was trying to hide her baby. They came after her with knives. They killed her and were about to eat the baby. But then an old man came behind them and said, give me the knife. And he cuts off his own arm. You don't see any of this. This is strictly just shot on Curtis telling this story. And he's like, he cut off his own arm and said, if you're so hungry, eat this. And the people that were getting ready to eat the baby dropped their knives. The old man was Gilliam. The baby was Edgar. Curtis was the man with the knife that killed Edgar's mother. That is why that scene in the beginning, when Curtis asks him if he remembers his mother, it sings so perfectly with it. Because now you know why he asked that. Like, why is he asking about his mom? It's because he wants to know if he remembers how his mother died. If he holds that memory somehow, some way. Because it's like, if he knew that I was the person that murdered his mother because I wanted to eat him, he wouldn't worship me the way that he does. And that's why Gilliam is so important to him. Because he stopped him from killing an innocent baby. And he said after Gilliam's sacrifice, other people started willingly cutting off arms and legs to feed the others. And Curtis says, I wanted to, but I couldn't do it. That's what that scar is from. When he tried to cut off his arm, but he didn't have the strength to. He wasn't strong enough. emotionally to cut off his own arm. You're left shell-shocked by that revelation, and the delivery and the emotion and the power with which Chris delivered it. We stand talent in this house. I would love nothing more than to sit down with Chris and talk to him, not only about this movie, but about that scene in particular. I need to know how he prepared for that. I need to know what the actor's process was to deliver and act in that scene in the way he did. Blown away is really all I can say about it. The Nan leans back against the gate and he says, "Thank you for your story, Curtis. You know what? I do want to blow a gate, but not this one." And he points to what looks like a door on the side. And he says, "Do you think that I've been saving this chronal to get high?" No. You have to remember, chronal is very flammable. So he packs it all together, adds a fuse. It's a bomb. He's been saving it so that he can blow the door open because he believes that they can now survive outside. The evidence he gives is the wreckage from the train where they passed the Ekaterina Bridge. He said 10 years ago, all he could see was the tail. But now the body and the wings are showing. The ice is melting. But before either of them can do anything, Claude, the woman in yellow, comes out, shoots Nam, and invites Curtis to dinner with Mr. Wilford. Wilford is played by the fabulous Ed Harris, wonderfully. I hate him. Like, you're supposed to hate him, but just the way in which he carries himself in this film, the character, well played, sir, in every sense of the phrase. Wilford speaks in the way that those who have been indoctrinated speak. He keeps talking about preordained position, and then he says, "We must always strive for balance," echoing what Minister Mason said in the sushi scene. And I'm sitting here like, this motherfucker is Thanos. Like, everybody's talking about balance. I wonder what Chris thought when he saw the scripts for Infinity War and Endgame. He's like, another one going on about balance and limited resources? Really? We're doing okay. They say it in The Lion King. Everything exists in a delicate balance. I get it. But it's like the way these people keep going on and on and on about it, the way that it's expressed is, again, just devoid of emotion. It has to be. Because it's like, you know, we have to keep the population under control. We don't have the time to wait for natural selection. We'll all starve and be sick, riddled with disease if we wait for that. So it is within this scene that Curtis learns that his mentor, Gilliam, was actually working with Wilford to orchestrate this entire revolution. Wilford says the front and the tail have to work together. And of course, Curtis doesn't believe him. He thinks it's all bullshit. He thinks Wilford's just a liar. Until Wilford echoes the line about two arms. He says, holding a woman is easier with both arms. Isn't that what Gilliam said? Like, can you imagine fighting, knowing that people that you cared about, people you were trying to save, lost their lives, and it was all a lie? There's this moment where Wilford leads Curtis to the engine. You see Curtis fall to his knees. Just, he's done. He is so done. And Wilford comes up behind him, raises him to his feet and says, I want you to take control. I'm old. I can't do this anymore. The engine is now your responsibility. That's what Gilliam wanted for you. That's what all of this was about. And that's the only way I can see, like, people have sent me links to the fan theories that Snowpiercer is in some way a sequel to Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Let's save that for another time. That's the only parallel that I really see, where it's like, you were chosen, you were the most kind, it's like you were the strongest, you were the brightest, you were this, you were that, you were what we need to continue this, to keep this going. You become afraid because you see the recognition and the acceptance of what Wilford is saying in Curtis's eyes. Nam tells Yuna, after she opens the gate, to go get the last match from Curtis. She runs and she says, "Curtis, give me the match." And he shoves her back. And you see her look down, almost as if she's just hurt and feels betrayed by being pushed away by Curtis. And then you see her grab a fork and start trying to dig at the floor. And she's trying to lift up this piece of the floor. And Curtis remembers she can see behind doors. So he lifts up the floor panel with her help and sees Timmy, Tanya's taken son, acting as a part of the engine. Wilford says that the part that they need to keep the engine going went extinct. So the only way to keep it going is to have these children who are the right size to fit in these small spaces act as that part so the train can keep going. And he says something so callously, thankfully the tail of the train manufactures a continuous supply of children. And it's that moment that breaks Curtis out of what the trance that Wilford had put him in. He knocks him out and he starts trying to pull Timmy from the part. And Wilford wakes up and says, "Don't you know we all have our preordained position?" And that's the motion that Timmy is making by clearing the gunk out of Curtis determines to save Timmy because he promised Tanya that he would save her son. And he manages to pull him out of the floor, but he loses his arm. His arm gets caught and is cut off. And that is the most brilliant piece of redemption I've ever seen in film. He wasn't strong enough to cut off his own arm, but he sacrificed that same arm, the arm that he could not sacrifice before to save somebody else. He now willingly sacrifices to save this small child. The fuse has been lit. The bomb is set to explode. As soon as that fire hits that chronal, the explosion causes an avalanche that kills everybody on the train except Yona and Timmy. And in the last shot of the film, you see Timmy and Yona looking at something in amazement. And high upon a mountain is a polar bear. And I think that's so poetic, given the state of our world now, where climate change is a thing and polar bears are dying because of global warming. So to have them here as a sign of life and of hope, watch this movie. Watch it. I pray with every cell in my body that I get to talk to Chris Evans about this movie. I want to talk to him about many things, but I pray that I get to talk to him about this movie. I'm kicking myself for not watching it before. This is one of the best films I've seen him in. If I'm including his work as Captain America, I think in certain aspects this supersedes that. But I will withhold my top 10 list until I've watched the rest of his films. I hope you enjoyed this video. I had fun making it. Please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. All of those good things. I know there are a million videos you could have watched today. I humbly thank you for coming to Slay.